You know, but you know, it's a government. I don't know how many pieces of use they got. But
it is nice to have that.
yeah, yes.
These times.
You're right. Some super quality. Some amazing. And so I'm glad we have that.
And when we had the first hybrid service,
Yep.
you watched that on Zoom. I was so glad to see you back.
Oh, thank you.
Always enjoy your participation.
When Reverend said, you know, there's something we could do this, I'm like,
You're the first to raise your hand.
but back then, my wife is but she was fine with this. We're all wearing masks. I don't have the hook. I don't know where you see it.
I forgot. I'm sitting in front of the computer.
They've got them up there, but it's like the we were talking just in the original session yesterday. Really because of you know what you project. We're talking, it's a little different. I know. But people look it's like, it took some practice getting used to just talking to the camera instead of a full tier. Well, go to a tier. That was it. That was my line. But everyone else is on. Okay, to my wife.
Across the street at Big Mac. Two or three people playing. So I don't know how it feels. We're just like playing.
No. Well, that's it for
Good morning. Good morning and welcome to this worship service at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Tucson. My name is Reverend Bethany Lowe, and I have the pleasure and honor of serving as minister of this congregation. Our community is as varied as the blooms of the Sonoran Desert. Whoever you are, whoever you have been, whoever you are in the path to becoming, I invite you to bring your whole self here and now. We are a covenantal community. which means that we make promises about how we will be with one another. And in these times of pandemic, wearing a mask while we're indoors and not speaking, one person from the pulpit speaking, getting vaccinated, and practicing social distancing are all part of our covenant with one another. If you are here in person this morning, our hope is that you are vaccinated to stay in covenant with this community. And if you are not vaccinated, I welcome you to join worship online next Sunday and the following Sundays until you can be vaccinated. You make that decision. If you are at home and joining us virtually, we see we are there. We know you are there. We appreciate your presence. Janice Hayho is our chat host today on YouTube, while our administrator, Mary Weiss, is taking a Sunday off. Thank you, Janice, for your work this morning. And I extend a special welcome to all the visitors and invite you to fill out a guest information card, which Janice will post in the YouTube chat right now. And if you're here in person, there are yellow clipboards with yellow sheets on them over on the welcome table, which you're welcome to fill out now or on your way out. We will meet on Zoom for social hour right after the service, and there's also be some coffee and snacks out on the patio if you're here with us in person. And Janice will post the link to the Zoom for the online social hour closer to the end of the service. This is our sixth in-person worship. Bert is counting. Our worship associate chair is counting. Thank you. Our sixth in-person worship service in many months. If you have not joined us yet in person and you would like to, we're asking that if you can, you use the Sign Up Genius, which is right on the front of our website. If you can't access that, you're welcome to call our administrator, Mary Weiss. And if you wake up on Sunday morning, if you've forgotten to do both of those things, now that we can have 140 people in the sanctuary on Sunday mornings, we are not filling. So if you wake up on Sunday and want to come to church and can't find the website, just come. There will be a space for you. And this morning, we have special guest speakers. Reverend Lisa McDaniel Hutchings is one of our affiliated community ministers. Those of you who've been around a few years, yes, she's behind me. Those of you who've been around a few years know her in a few different roles around here, and you might know some things about her. Her new role here, her current role is our affiliated community minister while she's doing community ministry. You can ask her or me what any of that means if you have questions. And Janet Moore is also going to be speaking for us. Hi, Janet. Janet's a beloved and long-term member and is part of the project, the new program that's starting up soon that you will hear about later in the service from Reverend Lisa. Welcome. We are so glad that you are here.
title of this poem is Santa Catalina Palette for Dad. The shadows you love are dancing on the mountains again. Light plays tag with dark, and every day the rough rock invents new colors to calm your soul. This patient granite lives and breathes in your heart, returns you to the mountains you rambled when you were young, paints a new picture for you each day to carry with you until tomorrow. The beauty you taught us to look for comes back to visit you, now with every cloud stitched against the blue, every incandescent sunset, every quiet brushstroke of sunrise.
Celebrates. I learned at minister school to project. My apologies. Our Unitarian Universalist living tradition celebrates our direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder. Many of us experience that when we're out in nature, and it moves us to a renewal of the spirit. As we light the chalice, symbol of our faith, may we engage our respect for the interdependent web of life and heed the call to heal our earth. This is our decade.
The Everything Seed by Carol Martinaco, illustrated by Joy Troyer. Have you ever watched a seed grow? Have you ever noticed how it begins so small, so still, so quiet, like a gift waiting to be opened? And how slowly it wakes up, begins to unfold, growing into something larger and larger and larger? Then you know that whatever comes from a seed usually ends up looking very little like the seed that it came from, which is also true of the very first seed. Once, long, long ago, way back before the beginning. So long ago, there was no such thing as time because there was no one there to count it. Everywhere was a huge, deep, mysterious place, like something waiting to happen. There were no stars, no sun or moon. There was no place like the earth, not a drop of water or a single tree or a rock or a flower, and certainly no living beings anywhere. But in that deep waiting space was hidden the tiniest point of something no bigger than a seed. You might call it an everything seed because that is what it became. No one knows where that first seed came from, but all at once, this tiny seed, cradled and nourished in the rich soil of space, woke up, broke open, and began to unfold. It unfolded and unfolded and blossomed forth into an enormous blazing ball of bright light, like a great grandmother sun. And the universe was born. Out fluttered the galaxies like a storm of snowflakes, swirling and gathering into the brightest, most blindingly beautiful clouds of stars. And out of those star clouds whirled our own star, the one we call the sun, and our Earth and our moon and all the round spinning planets we have learned how to name. And this is the secret of that tiny seed. You and I were there in the very beginning. Just as the idea for each leaf on the big oak tree lies hidden inside an acorn, we were there. Everything that is now, ever was, or ever will be, was first inside that tiny seed. So whenever you hold a seed in your hand and wonder what it could become, imagine how you and all that is here once came from the tiniest speck of an everything seed. Now, if this was an ordinary story, it would end right there. But this is the story of the universe, and it keeps unfolding. What once began in a blazing blossom of light continues every day. New stars sprout open in the deep soil of space. New plants and animals appear on the earth. Seeds of many kinds are scattered all over the earth to help us remember. And new people are born every day with the spark of that first light still alive and burning deep inside, waiting, like the everything seed, to shine in ways that are yet to be known.
The Summer Day by Mary Oliver. Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean. The one who has flung herself out of the grass. The one who is eating sugar out of my hand. Who is moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down. Who is gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I have been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?
Thank you, Janet. And thank you, Bill, for your words earlier. And it's good to have the choir back. Our offering is a weekly practice of generosity. It is a weekly reminder that we are this congregation building this congregations, this buildings, this campuses stewards. One person, one family, one pledge unit cannot support an entire congregation. It takes all of us. An offering is not payment for worship. It is not to cover the electric bill for this hour or the AV equipment. It is not for the coffee that comes later. Our congregation, we exist in a capitalist world, but that does not mean that your weekly offering is a transaction. This offering is a weekly reminder that generosity is a relational practice. And here in this congregation, we ask that you be generous with your time, your talent, and yes, your treasure. You decide what generous means for you this morning, this week, this month. Our offering, this weekly spiritual practice of generosity, will now be freely given and gratefully received. If you are here in person, the offering baskets are by the door you came in. You're welcome to drop your offering in now or on your way out. If you're joining us online, instructions for the offering will appear on your screen during the offertory.
Christina Figueres and Tom Rivet-Carnac together led the negotiations for the United Nations during the 2015 climate agreement in Paris. Christina is a Costa Rican and was the executive secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Tom is a British scientist, previously the president and CEO of the Carbon Disclosure Project USA, and a former Buddhist monk. Following their work together, they published a book in 2020 called The Future We Choose, Surviving the Climate Crisis. It's a cautionary tale about the world's changing climate and its impact on the fate of humanity. Their premise is that this is our decade to act. We must cut our carbon emissions in half by 2030 and every decade following so that we reach net zero emissions by 2050. Net zero means that we've eliminated carbon emissions to the point that the Earth can naturally absorb whatever's left through its ecosystems. If we don't cut our emissions in half this decade, here is the world that we are creating. It's 2050. Beyond the emission reduction registered in 2015, no further efforts were made to control emissions. We are heading for a world that will be more than 3 degrees warmer by 2100.
The first thing that hits you is the air. In many places around the world, the air is hot, heavy, and depending on the day, clogged with particulate pollution. Your eyes often water. Your cough never seems to disappear. You can no longer simply walk out your front door and breathe fresh air. There might not be any. Everything might look fine, sunny and clear, but you know better. When storms and heat waves overlap and cluster, the air pollution and intensified surface ozone levels can make it dangerous to go outside without a specially designed face mask, which only some can afford.
Our world is getting hotter. Over the next 2 decades, projections tell us that temperatures in some areas will rise even higher, an irreversible development now utterly beyond our control. Oceans, forests, plants, trees, and soil had for many years absorbed half of the carbon dioxide we spewed out. Now there are few forests left, most of them either logged or consumed by wildfire. And the permafrost is belching greenhouse gases into an already overburdened atmosphere. The increasing heat of the earth is suffocating us, and in 5 to 10 years, vast swaths of the planet will be increasingly inhospitable to humans. We don't know how habitable the western United States will be by 2100. No one knows what the future holds for their children and grandchildren. Tipping point after tipping point is being reached, casting doubt on the form of future civilization.
Passing tipping points has already been painful. The first was the vanishing coral reefs. Soon there will be no reefs anywhere. It's only a matter of a few years before the last 10% dies off. The second tipping point was the melting of the ice sheets in the Arctic. There is no summer Arctic sea ice anymore because the warming is worse at the poles, between 6 and 8 degrees warmer than other areas. The white ice used to reflect this, but now it's gone, so the dark seawater absorbs more heat, expanding the mass of water and pushing sea levels even higher.
More moisture in the air and higher sea surface temperatures have caused a surge in extreme hurricanes and tropical storms, causing brutal infrastructure devastation and extreme flooding, killing thousands and displacing millions. As devastating as rising oceans have been, droughts and heat waves inland have created a special hell. Vast regions have succumbed to severe aridification, sometimes followed by desertification, and wildlife there have become a distant memory. These places can barely support human life. Their aquifers have dried up. Extreme heat is on the march. You try not to think of the 2 billion people who live in the hottest parts of the world, where for upwards of 45 days per year, temperatures skyrocket to 140 degrees Fahrenheit, a point at which the human body cannot be outside for longer than about 6 hours because it loses the ability to cool itself down. Mass migrations to less hot rural areas are beset by a host of refugee problems, civil unrest, and bloodshed over diminished water availability.
In some parts of the United States, There are fiery conflicts about water, battles between the rich who are willing to pay for as much water as they want, and everyone else demanding equal access to life-giving water. Government leaders have been stymied on the issue for years, and with every passing month, the Colorado River and the Rio Grande shrink further. The Tier 1 water shortage announced in 2023 resulted in reductions of water available for agriculture in Arizona. Now limitations affect the water allocations to cities.
Food production swings wildly from month to month, season to season, depending on where you live. More people are starving than ever before. Climate zones have shifted, so some new areas have become available for agriculture, like Alaska and the Arctic, while others have dried up, such as Mexico and California. Still others are unstable because of the extreme heat, never mind flooding, wildfires, and tornadoes. This makes the food supply in general highly unpredictable. The tyranny of supply and demand is now unforgiving. Because of its increasing scarcity, food can now be wildly expensive. Income inequality has always existed, but it has never been this stark or this dangerous. As a result, food riots, coups, and civil wars are throwing the world's most vulnerable from the frying pan into the fire. As developed countries seek to seal their borders from mass migration, they too feel the consequences. Stock markets are crashing, currencies are wildly fluctuating, and the European Union has disbanded.
As committed as nations are to keeping wealth and resources within their borders, they are determined to keep people out. Most countries' armies are now highly militarized border patrols. Ever since the equatorial belt started to become difficult to inhabit, an unending stream of migrants have been moving from Central America towards Mexico and the United States. The same scenes are playing out across Europe and Asia. Enormous political pressure is being placed on northern and southern countries to either welcome migrants or keep them out. Some countries are letting people in, but only under conditions approaching indentured servitude. It will be years before the stranded migrants are able to find asylum or settle in new refugee cities that have formed along the borders.
Those living within stable countries may be safe, but the psychological toll is mounting. The demise of the human species is being discussed more and more. For many, the only uncertainty is how long we'll last. How many more generations will see the light of day? Suicides are the most obvious manifestations of the prevailing despair, but there are other indications: a sense of bottomless loss, unbearable guilt, and fierce resentment, all at previous generations who didn't do what was necessary to ward off this unstoppable calamity.
Not quite yet. Not quite yet. Thank you. We make a promise to you here in worship, and that's that we don't ever dig a hole without giving you a ladder out. This is the pivot towards the ladder. Our earth is strong. It can hold our pain and our joy, our love and our anger. Our shared bowl, which we use for joys and sorrows each week, is strong enough to hold those big rocks, the collective celebrations and mournings, and also the smaller stones we will add it later to signify our individual sharings this morning. We hold in our heart collectively this morning all those suffering due to war and violence, racism and transphobia. We pray for peace to prevail, and for dignity to be upheld. We who live in the desert know that water is a life-sustaining and scarcer resource. Let's remember those who are walking through our desert right now without access to water. We pour water from a plastic jug similar to the ones used by those seeking to assure greater access to water in the desert, like our ministry partners. No more deaths. This morning, for our joys and sorrows, I'm going to invite us to reflect on our climate griefs. I'm sure something came up for you in that last piece, a grief about climate chaos, climate change that you carry with you, or maybe it's a new grief that you just heard. So Joys and Sorrows again this morning is going to focus on our climate griefs. We will be using Mentimeter again for those gathered here in person and those at home. The Mentimeter instructions will appear on your screen during the piano music. If you're here in person and don't have access to a smart device that has the internet, Brian Moon, the tall guy in the blue shirt in the back, can collect your responses and put them in for you if you don't have a smart device to access Mentimeter. And you are all going to be answering the question, what climate grief are you holding today? If you're here in person while the music plays, you are welcome to come up to the table and put a stone in the water to symbolize that thing you are holding, that climate grief you are holding. The pebbles create ripples of hope and hopefully action. Press the down arrow. Just the down arrow on the keyboard. Reading your responses. The stupidity of those opposing climate actions. Water in the Southwest. It's here, it's home. The greed of many. Fear of scarcity. Loss of water, a waterfall. Scared for my children's future. Guilty over the future we are leaving for them. Hopeful at new life. It's all very complex. I'm afraid for my grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Feeling unable to make a difference. Grief over the mass extinction of so many creatures and the loss of biodiversity. Grief over lack of concern for marginalized. Sorrow for my granddaughter's future. I grieve that I always dreamed I'd see the coral reef, and now my son may never see a reef in its glory. Loss of biomass in US forests due to insects and disease. Wanting to switch to more energy-saving devices, but not being able to afford the upgrades. That's real. Grief for the future of today's children. The impact on animals and plants. The next generation will suffer because we did so little. The rapidly falling water level in Lakes Powell and Mead, supplying Arizona's water. That not enough people take it seriously. I hold the polar bears in my heart today. Grieving over the helplessness, thinking it's too late. Worrying about lack of rain. Those and other griefs we hold in this space for our climate, this climate chaos, and into that, I offer these words of prayer from the Reverends Marjorie Bowens-Wheatley and Clyde Grubbs. Will you join me in a moment of meditation or prayer or contemplation, whatever is your own way of centering down? The road of history is long, full of both hopes and disappointments. In times past, there have been wars and rumors of wars, violence and exploitation, hunger and homelessness, and destruction of this earth, your creation. We have become a global village, and a growing realization of how fragile this earth is and how interconnected we are to each other and to all creation. We cannot continue to live in the old way. We must make a change, see a new way, a way towards peace with justice and a healthier planet. Oh, great creative spirit, you have given a vision of the good, and we yearn for a new way. But where are we to find the courage to begin this work? We know that a different tomorrow is possible, but how can we build it? We think of the prophets, those people who voiced unpopular opinions, who made personal sacrifices and sometimes lost their lives for the sake of justice. We think of Isaiah, who called out to let those who are held in captivity go free, to give solace to the poor and homeless. Let us be inspired by all who work to overcome misery, poverty, and exploitation. We think of Harriet Tubman, who called out to people of goodwill to join her on an underground railroad, to lift a dehumanized people from the bondage of slavery to the promise of freedom, even when it meant challenging unjust laws. Let us be inspired by those who are outlaws for freedom. We think of Chief Seattle, who reminded us that we belong to the earth, not the earth to us. Let us be inspired by all those who work for the healing of creation, of Mother Earth and all her creatures. Who are the prophets who inspire you? They may be well known or known only to you, offering personal inspiration, courage, and hope. May they join a great cloud of witnesses to a new way of life, the way of peace and justice, the way of justice lived according to the way of peace, the beloved community for us and the earth. So may it be, and amen.
The ends of the earth are in thy hand, the seas are deep and far off land, and I am thine, I rest in thee. Great Spirit, come and rest in me.
In the next chapter, excuse me, in the next chapter of the book, Figueres and Rivet Karnak describe what life on Earth will be like living in a carbon-neutral, regenerative world. They spend the second half of their book describing in depth 10 actions that will lead us in doing what's necessary to get to the world that we must create. If we do cut our carbon emissions in half by 2030 and every decade following, so that we reach net zero emissions by 2050, here's where we could be. It is 2050. We have been successful at cutting our emissions in half every decade since 2020. We are heading for a world that will be less than 3 degrees Fahrenheit warmer by 2100.
In most places in the world, the air is moist and fresh. Even in cities, it feels a lot like walking through a forest. The air is cleaner than it has been since before the Industrial Revolution. We have trees to thank for that. They are everywhere.
It wasn't the single solution we required, but the proliferation of trees bought us the time we needed to vanquish carbon emissions. Corporate donations and public money funded the biggest tree planting campaign in history. When we started, it was purely practical, a tactic to combat climate change created by relocating the carbon. Trees took carbon dioxide out of the air, released oxygen, and put the carbon back where it belonged in the soil. This, of course, helped to diminish climate change, but the benefits were even greater. On every sensory level, the ambient feeling of living on what has again become a green planet has been transformative, especially in cities. With many more trees and far fewer cars, it has been possible to reclaim whole streets for urban agriculture and for children's play. Every vacant lot, even grimy, unused alley, has been repurposed and turned into shady grove. Every rooftop has been converted to either a vegetable or a floral garden. The forest cover worldwide is now 50%, and agriculture has evolved to become more tree-based. Now we have shady groves of nut and fruit orchards, timberland interspersed with grazing, parkland areas that spread for miles, new havens for our regenerated population of pollinators.
Luckily for the 75% of the population who live in cities, new electric railways crisscross interior landscapes. In the US, high-speed rail networks on the east and west coasts have replaced the vast majority of domestic flights, with East Coast connectors to Atlanta and Chicago. Because flight speeds have slowed down to increase planes' fuel efficiency, passenger bullet trains make some journeys even faster, with no emissions whatsoever. The U.S. Train Initiative was a monumental public project that sparked the economy for a decade, replacing miles and miles of interstate highways with new transportation system, created millions of jobs for train technology experts engineers, and construction workers. This mass effort helped to re-educate and retrain many of those displaced by the dwindling fossil fuel economy. Unsurprisingly, the US had the hardest time of all switching to electric vehicles. Then came the breakthrough in battery storage, the cost reductions that came from finding alternative materials for manufacture, and finally, the complete overhaul of the charging and parking infrastructure. Satisfying our appetite for speed finally did the trick by switching from combustion to electric engines that could go from 0 to 60 in 3.5 seconds. Yes. What's strange is that it took us so long to realize that the electric motor gives you more torque, more speed when you need it, the ability to recapture energy when you brake, and it requires less maintenance.
Running parallel to the mega public works transportation effort was an increasingly confident race to harness the power of renewable energy. A major part of the shift to net zero emissions was a focus on electricity. Achieving that goal required not only an overhaul of the existing infrastructure, but breaking up grids and decentralizing power. Most of our energy now comes from renewable sources. Smart tech prevents unnecessary energy consumption as artificial intelligence units switch off appliances and machines when not in use. For the developed world, the wide-ranging transition to renewable energy was at times uncomfortable, as it often involved retrofitting old infrastructure and doing things in new ways.
Homes and buildings all over the world are becoming self-sustaining far beyond their electrical needs. For example, all buildings now collect rainwater and manage their own water use. Renewable sources of electricity made possible localized desalination, which means clean drinking water can now be produced on demand anywhere in the world. We also use it to irrigate hydroponic gardens, to flush toilets, and to shower.
We are making communities stronger. Now, to make things cheaper, cleaner, and more sustainable, our orientation is more local. Things that used to be done individually are now done communally, growing vegetables, capturing rainwater, and composting. Resources and responsibilities are shared now. At first, we resisted this togetherness. We were used to doing things individually and in the privacy of our own homes. But pretty quickly, the camaraderie and unexpected new network of support started to feel good, something to be prized. For most people, the new way has turned out to be a better recipe for happiness.
Food production and procurement are a big part of the community effort. When it became clear we needed to revolutionize industrialized farming, we transitioned quickly to regenerative farming practices, mixing perennial crops, sustainable grazing, and improved crop rotation on large-scale farms with increased community reliance on small farms. Instead of going to a big grocery store for food flown in from hundreds, if not thousands of miles, we buy most of our food from small local farmers and producers. While this community approach to food production makes things more sustainable, food is still expensive, which is why growing our own is still a necessity. We've come to realize that food is expensive because it should be expensive. It takes valuable resources to grow it after all: water, soil, sweat, time. For that reason, the most resource-depleting foods of all, animal protein and dairy products, have practically disappeared from our diets. But the plant-based replacements are so good that most of us don't notice the absence of meat and dairy. Most young children cannot believe we used to kill animals for food.
While we may have successfully reduced carbon emissions, we're still dealing with the after effects of record levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The long-living greenhouse gases have nowhere to go, so they are still causing increasingly extreme weather, though it was less extreme than it would have been had we continued to burn fossil fuels. Glaciers and Arctic ice are still melting, and the sea is still rising. Severe droughts and desertification are occurring in the western US, the Mediterranean, and parts of China. Ongoing extreme weather and resource degradation continue to multiply existing disparities in income, public health, food security, and water availability. Now, governments have recognized climate change factors for the threat multipliers that they are. That awareness allows us to predict problems and head them off before they become humanitarian crises. So while people remain at risk every day, the situation is not as drastic or chaotic as it might have been.
The ongoing refugee situation has been escalating for decades and is still a major source of strife and discord. But around 15 years ago, we stopped calling it a crisis. Countries agreed on guidelines for managing refugee influxes, how to smoothly assimilate populations, how to distribute aid and resources, and how to share the tasks within particular regions.
How we feel about the world has changed deeply. Extricating ourselves from self-destruction would have been impossible if we hadn't changed our mindset and our priorities. If we hadn't realized that doing what is good for humanity goes hand in hand with doing what is good for the earth. The most fundamental change was that collectively, as citizens, corporations, and governments, we began adhering to a new bottom line. Is it good for humanity, whether profit is made or not? When we began to fight for the fate of humanity, we were thinking only about the species' survival. But at some point, we understood that it was as much about the fate of our humanity. We emerged from the climate crisis as more mature members of the community of life, capable not only of restoring ecosystems, but of unfolding our dormant potentials of human strength and discernment.
Lovely. We like the second story best, yes? Yes. Unfortunately, it won't magically happen. We must take action now. Those authors, Figueres and Rivet Karnak, they are new prophets for me. And they give us several chapters on doing what's necessary to make things happen. They also have a website called globaloptimism.com. And I would ask that online, if the YouTube chat host could put that into, post that, that would be helpful. globaloptimism.com. Anyway, in the last chapter of the book, it's called What You Can Do Now. It's an action plan for stubborn climate activists committed to fulfilling the vision of a regenerative world. It's something that we can only do together. Here's the first thing that they suggest we do right now. And I invite you to do it with me right now. Take a deep breath and decide that collectively we can do this and that you will play your part. You will be a hopeful visionary for humanity through these dark days. From this moment, despair ends and tactics begin. Let's try that again. Take a deep breath and decide that collectively we can do this and that you will play your part. You will be a hopeful visionary for humanity through these dark days. From this moment, despair ends and tactics begin. And remember, you can always get continued support at globaloptimism.com. Now, the authors offer this suggestion as something that we can do this week. They say, go outside and look around. This world is damaged and hurting, but it is also beautiful and intact and whole. Pay attention to something you have forgotten. Maybe emerging wildflowers, amazing saguaros, sunset on the mountains. Feel the gratitude that we owe the earth for her bounty and beauty. Please do try that on your own this week. And know that there is another opportunity available to you. Janet, Bill Kais, who you saw on the video at the beginning, and I invite you to what we're calling Worship in the Woods. Think part hike, part worship, and total immersion in the beauty of our local natural areas. We're hoping to offer worship in the woods every couple of months, on Mount Lemmon in the summer, in the desert in the winter. Some hikes easily accessible, others more challenging. We'll intersperse walking with readings, music, information about the natural beauty we're enjoying, poetry, and meditation based on our particular theme. The first Worship in the Woods will be in April, but we need your help to discover who our audience really is. So perhaps you saw those surveys, interest surveys, as you were coming in this morning. But if you didn't get one, and if you are at all interested, please raise up your hand and an usher will bring you a survey and a pencil if you need one. It's really a quick thing. It's mostly checking boxes. And if you're online, Janice will be putting in the link in the chat because you can also do this online. But please fill it out now if you can. It's quick, and we need to hear from you not later than April 6th, because then, of course, we have some more planning to do. There are lots of hands up here in the congregation. You can't see them online, but this is a very hopeful thing for our community and our earth. It's an opportunity to feel that joy out in nature. I truly believe that people will protect what they love. So we invite you to join us in the woods, whether they be pines or saguaros, to take a time out from the chaos of the world, renew your spirit, and feel the awe and wonder that nature can inspire. Our Unitarian Universalist living tradition celebrates our direct experience of transcending mystery and wonder. Many of us feel that in nature, and it moves us to a renewal of the spirit. As we extinguish our chalice, may we engage our love and respect for the web of all existence of which we are a part, and heed the call to heal our earth, to be keepers of the earth. This is our decade.